Good morning. I'm Randy Kay in for Carol Costello. Thanks so much for joining me this morning. Checking top stories now. Rafael Ramos, one of two NYPD officers shot to death at point-blank range last Saturday, is being remembered at a public wake today. His funeral is scheduled for tomorrow. The family of his partner, Wenjin Liu, is holding a news conference at the top of the hour. An Oregon woman is offering few details on her 4-month-long nightmare. Stacey Addison says that she was detained in East Timor because she unknowingly shared a taxi with a stranger carrying methamphetamine. Well, she's now out of jail and a guest of a former leader of the small Southeast Asian nation. Details on her release are not known. Iraqi police say the ISIS-appointed governor of Mosul has been killed in a coalition airstrike. That governor had been in office for less than a month. U.S. airstrikes had killed one of his predecessors as well. The president may be on vacation in Hawaii, but America's conflicts overseas against terror groups like ISIS and the Taliban are never far from mind. While visiting with troops at the Kaneohe Bay Marine Base, the president reflected on the impending end to the combat mission in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan has a chance to rebuild its own country. We are safer. It's not going to be a source of terrorist attacks again.
To discuss, let me bring in Ben Ferguson, CNN political commentator and host of The Ben Ferguson Show, and Maria Cardona, CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist. Good morning to you both. Maria, let me start with you here. Does it seem a bit too soon, Maria, to make a comment like that? That we have 1,750 troops in Iraq. Defense Secretary Hagel says that we're now sending 1,300 more. Is the president speaking out too soon on this?
Well, I suppose that it's always a risk to make that kind of absolute statement, but I think the president was speaking to, the talent and the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform who have spent more than 10 years focused on making America safer. And so I think in that context, he has a right to be applauding the troops that have been essentially putting in blood and treasure. And Americans are a war-weary country. It was something that he promised to do during his campaign, and it is something that he has now accomplished, that our troops have accomplished. And so I think the focus is on turning over a country to the Afghans, who are the ones who now have to have responsibility for that. And the troops that we're having stay behind are to ensure that that kind of training continues, so that what the president says continues to be true.
Let me let Ben weigh in here. Ben, are we really safer now? What do you make of the president's comments?
Look, I would say look at the blueprints of what happened in Iraq when you pull out too early for the sake of a bucket list. And that's the biggest concerning issue I have here. And really the main reason why the president has had such a terrible relationship with the Pentagon and our men and women in uniform. They don't think that he is doing this right. And you can see the writing on the wall here for his agenda. He wants to say, I ended Iraq, I ended Afghanistan, that is my legacy. I closed Guantanamo Bay as well, is one of the big things on his bucket list. But just because you say we're safer, just because you say now is the time to leave, that's not what the men and women on the ground are saying. That's not what the commanders are saying. That's not what the Secretary of Defense has been saying. And so, are we picking an ideological viewpoint, a political idea, more than we are a national security issue? And I think Iraq is a great example of, hey, you leave too early. It doesn't matter what your speech says. On the ground, if things aren't prepared and they're not ready to take care of themselves, look at what has happened with ISIS. Look at what has happened with Iraq. We now have more people going back there, and the world is not safer in Iraq. And because of ISIS, all over the world, there are real credible threats now.
Let me ask you about it. Go on, Maria.
I just want to say one thing, Randy. There's a Washington Post story today about how the ISIS, quote-unquote, caliphate is crumbling. And so I think the long-term focus of this president, I think, has been right on. We have sent people back to Iraq, Ben, exactly to make sure that the kind of work that and the kind of sacrifice that our men and women in uniform have made there for more than 10 years isn't for naught. But Maria,
did we leave too early?
And so
did we leave too early?
Well, you know what? All of those judgments, Ben, I think will come with time. And I think that's why I said what I said at the very beginning.
ISIS would say, and the people of Iraq would say we left too early.
The kind of parameters that we are seeing on the ground from our intelligence officers, and yes, from many of our military men and women, Ben, they do think that it's time to leave. They do think that they have sacrificed a lot, and they do think that they are handing the countries over to the people who ultimately have to have responsibility for them.
So Ben, though, it sounds like you're saying that ISIS would never even be where they are today and have such a stronghold there if we had stayed.
Absolutely, and that's what the last three secretaries of defense have said, and that's what many of the commanders have said about the criticism of this administration. Just because you want to end a war doesn't mean you just do it just because it's on your list of things to do. You have
do you
to look
really
at the
think a president would do that?
intelligence on the ground.
That's certainly not what President Obama did.
Maria, let me finish.
Ben, come on.
Maria, you had the people at the Pentagon and the secretaries of defense telling the president now is not the time to leave Iraq, and he did it anyway. You cannot dispute that fact. Go look at what Leon Panetta and others have said about the situation on the ground. That is why the president's had such a rocky relationship with the Pentagon and the militaries, because when he walks in the room, sometimes he doesn't like to deal with the reality of what the situation is on the ground. And the reality of the situation on the ground right now in Afghanistan is you may want to leave, but it doesn't mean you should leave. I would love to leave, but it doesn't mean that you should leave.
There were many commanders who actually supported the president's moves to make sure that these countries are handed over to the hands and to the responsibility of the people who actually live there. That's what should be happening, and he's doing it in the safest way possible.
I was hoping we were going to find a little bit of Christmas cheer between the two of you, but I should have known better.
Always, Randy.
I certainly should have known better. Ben Ferguson, Maria Cardona, thank you both very much.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. New York City.